I want to welcome everyone back to our Bible study on prophecy and current events and how the two seems to be merging very quickly in our world. This is part 3, of course, and I urge you, if you have not seen the first 2 parts of this Bible study, to go back and watch them as we're kind of building a case here and a foundation for the following lessons. So I urge you to go back and see them. And today and next week, we're going to be concentrating on that famous chapter of Revelation 13 where you can't buy or sell. So I urge you to stay with us. Now, let's begin our study with prayer. Let's begin with prayer. Father, we thank you for bringing each one of us here to this Bible study. We know that you have plans and purposes for each of us. Open up our hearts and minds and spirits toward you. And let the words spoken here be your words. And let the message again be your message. And Father, we pray the Holy Spirit will be manifested in a powerful way, leading us into all truth and telling us of things to come. Amen. In Jesus' precious name. I want to do a very, very quick review of what we've looked at for the last time, probably for Daniel, and I just want to kind of bring things together as we enter into a deeper study of Revelation 13. Now, as you recall, we went right to Daniel, and part of our first study that we had, we went to Daniel chapter 12. And in Daniel chapter 12, we read that famous verse about that we've been going over and over about, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end, when many run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And so I believe that verse is telling us, as with the 8th and 9th verses of that chapter, that Daniel is written for the end. And Daniel, as I said, goes hand in hand with Revelation. And this searching the scriptures, men run to and fro, searching the scriptures, and knowledge increases, and I believe that's knowledge of the prophecies. As we get closer and closer to the second coming, more and more is revealed to us, because it's now the time. And we went to Daniel 7:1, the 7th chapter of Daniel, verses 1 and 2, and it said, the 4 winds of heaven strive upon the great sea. Daniel has this great vision of the end. And if we look through the lens of future events of the last days, Daniel's vision, we went to Revelation 17 and Revelation chapter 7 and proved that and showed that this vision was for the end. The 4 winds striving, the planet has totally turned away from God except for a remnant, and things are falling apart, and the 4 winds of strife from heaven are falling upon these, of course, the great sea, which are the peoples, nations, and tongues of the world, Revelation 17:15. Then we talked about how Daniel sees these 4 beasts coming up out of this turbulent sea, this turmoil at the end, and rising up, and one of them, of course, is a lion, and we talked about the lion having eagle's wings and lion's heart, and of course that's taken from it. The wings are plucked, the lion's heart's taken from it, and that lion is humbled, and I believe that's America. America has turned from God. America is being humbled. I believe down this quick decline, this rather rapid decline. And, of course, the second one was a bear coming up he sees, and, of course, we identified that as Russia, symbol of the bear. And the leopard, we talked about the leopard and how the leopard, the third beast, is one of the most sacred symbols in China. And I believe it's symbolic of the Chinese coming upon the world, seeing quickly, as a leopard is, stealthily. And I believe that was China, as we talked about. I think there's ample evidence to put us in that direction. And, of course, the 4th beast is that dreadful, terrible beast, that new world order that brings the other 3 into this unholy alliance, this confederacy. So then we went to Daniel 8, and we showed that Daniel 8, there's a ram with 2 horns pushing east, west, and south, or it's pushing, I should say, west and north and south, and this ram is causing all kinds of problems and havoc in the Middle East, and suddenly this he-goat, this male goat, comes from the west and smashes into that ram with rage. And we looked at that, how that could possibly be America and its allies. You know, Gabriel comes to Daniel and explains to him, as Daniel has that first part of that vision, he says, this is for the end. And this Media and Persia, he identifies them as Media and Persia, are pushing in all directions, causing all kinds of havoc. And we've identified them, of course, Persia is Iran, modern-day Iran. and media, I think, is Iraq, much of Iraq. Much of media was in Iraq, parts of Iran, and parts of Syria. But I believe we saw the Gulf War in 1991 was almost like a dress rehearsal, as powers came from the West with George Bush America leading the coalition, and they came in and slammed into Iraq. And it happened again with 2003 with George Bush, his son, and they let another shock and awe. And remember, it says in the prophecies, they come and they don't touch the ground as they come, the powers from the West. And they just pulverize these two powers, Media and Persia. So I believe that we're seeing that, and I believe that is coming. A further attack possibly on whatever goes into Iraq. Iraq is now kind of a proxy of Iran. And I believe that there's something going to happen. Something will trigger it in the West, a 9/11 or whatever, and over they come. Over they come. Now, following that hot, fast war in the Middle East, of course, the powers in the West are victorious. But after that main power leading the coalition is suddenly broken, as it says in Daniel, the 8th chapter. It's broken. And I believe it's the same event as Daniel 7. The wings are plucked and the lion's heart's taken from it, and it's given the heart of a man. And the heart of a man is deceitfully wicked, and who can know it? Darkness sets in to America, I believe, as well as decline. And that's what brings out these bad guys out of the woodwork. They sense blood in the water. America's on the decline, and out come the Russians, the Chinese, and on and on and on. At any rate, we looked at all of that. Well, let me say this. As it is broken, America's still on the scene, but there's the three other beasts that we talked about in Daniel 7. So at any rate, I don't think that's a hard scenario to accept, seeing as how America is heavily overextended militarily, heavily overextended economically, $34 or $35 trillion in debt, and blowing through $1 trillion every 100 days. It's amazing what's going on. Amazing what's going on. Now, I want to go back to, with all that in mind, and that fast review, I want to go back to Revelation chapter 13, that famous chapter. And then we're going to pick up our study in Revelation 13. Now, with Revelation 13, I want to reread the first and second verses of Revelation 13. It is amazing to me how much of these prophecies seem to be being fulfilled right now, or beginning to be fulfilled right now. Now, Revelation 13, verses 1 and 2, let's reread these. Then I stood. Now, John, as I said, has visions, and his visions match very much the visions of Daniel. Only Daniel a lot of us concerned about what happens down here in the last days, and John is seeing many things in the temple in heaven that are occurring up there in the last days. So anyway, here we are. John he's standing by the sea. Now, John picks up where Daniel leaves off, as I said. Daniel leaves off, with the three powers come together, the three beasts come in, and they come together, as we see here, into that fourth beast, the New World Order. Okay, let's begin reading. Then I stood in the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. Okay, so we're looking at this beast power again. Now, I believe many people are pushing the idea that this is somehow another demonic power, a demonic being like the Antichrist. And I think this is not a being, this is the beast system. This is the beast system. Fully manifested, this is the beast system. This is the unholy alliance. This is where the nations come together into that new world order, that great reset, as they're now referring to it. Now they come into this unholy alliance. And as I said, I believe if the leopard is the body and the bear are the feet, then they are the muscle behind this thing. I believe China is the muscle behind this new world order, this beast system that comes into being. It's the muscle behind it. Now, notice that the United States is just a mouthpiece, mouth of a lion. But the real power is the body and the feet and all the other nations brought into this thing. Now, I touched upon several things that are happening in America that obviously, it's on a very, very dark path with transgenderism and drag queen story hours in the schools and some of the churches and that type of thing, and we're seeing all kinds of stuff, vicious attacks on marriage and the family, and all these things are happening in America. It's astounding to me. But at any rate, let me just give you a couple headlines from last Easter, March 30th, 2024. White House issues proclamation declaring Easter to be Transgender Day of Visibility. It's beyond my comprehension. Talk about being brazen and defiant against God, declaring Easter Transgender Day of Visibility. Also, the President Biden banned all religious art form from the White House Easter-themed art contest. Now, they have an art contest, and they have an egg roll and that. They banned all religious themes and artwork from that. It just boggles my mind. I don't know if I need to say much about that. It's quite obvious what's going on. Governor Kathy Hochul of New York orders New York landmarks lit up in trans flag colors on Easter Sunday for Transgender Day of Visibility, including on the One World Trade Center and at Niagara Falls. They lit it up on Easter. It's disturbing to me is when they passed gay marriage and they lit up the White House in rainbow colors. Talk about, waving your fist to God. There is a God in heaven in this thing. But at any rate, that's kind of indicative of where America is going. Talk about being spiritual, dark spiritually. And there's so much I could say here. I do in the first lesson, I talked about this quite a bit, so I urge you to go back and look at that. Now, also, as I said, China I believe this leopard is the muscle behind this. Now, China right now is flexing its muscles all over the world. For example, they're worried about Taiwan. The Western leaders are somewhat concerned about Taiwan because Taiwan, that island off the coast of China, free Taiwan, makes all the computer chips for all the iPhones and all the computers and cars. It's incredible. Now, if China was to seize Taiwan, which they really want to do, they want to bring it back into the communist fold. They want to reunite it with mainland China. It would put us in a terrible position in the Western world because all the chips are being built in Taiwan. Now, I've heard they've been talking about moving some of this chip industry to Israel, but again, this Taiwan thing is really, really disturbing. Also, besides Taiwan, they've got control of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal was turned over to the Panamanians in the 70s by the Carter administration, and now the Chinese have gotten hold of the Panama Canal, which would give them a real chokehold on the trade in the Western world, or trade all over the place, because you would have to go around South America if they closed down the Panama Canal, which would cause all kinds of problems. Also, I thought it was interesting that the Chinese have let spy balloons go over America. And they hover over our sensitive military installations. The Chinese have these balloons going over, and they're hovering there. At first, the Pentagon denied it, but now they're admitting they are spy balloons, and they are collecting information on, at these military installations. And there's no repercussions. There's much of a response to this, which makes you wonder. The Chinese have enormous influence over all of these things. It's just amazing how far they've gone. And also, they're trying to build a Chinese base in Cuba, a military base in Cuba, which is 90-some miles off the coast of Florida. But it's amazing how they are flexing their muscle. Now, I want to move on to some of the movers and shakers in this new world order, in this world government, this push to bring the world under this totalitarian world government. Let me just say this. Let me preface this by saying in the past, I've studied Bible prophecy since 1981. I mean, seriously studied it. And I was part of a fantastic Bible study group on prophecy. And then, as I said earlier, or in a previous lesson study, in the 70s, late 70s, 80s, and 90s. So, at any rate, I could not get around my head around the fact that at some point in time, the whole world was going to be part of this totalitarian system where you can't buy or sell unless you have a mark. Now, to do that, you have to have control of the population. You have to have control. You have to be able to, monitor everything they're doing, everything they're eating, drinking, going where they're going, who they're associating with, all this stuff. And now, for the first time in history, they do have the technology for that. They have biosensors and all this stuff, and social credit systems in China, biometrics. They're bringing in digital currencies, digital IDs, digital passports, which I want to discuss next week as part of the Mark of the Beast. But they're doing all of these things, digitizing, to get control of the population. It's amazing how that is going. And let me say this. Besides the different aspects of the technological control they have, or getting to very quickly, I should say, I was amazed. I just, like I said, I couldn't get my head around this control business. And then I saw COVID. When COVID came in, all of a sudden you had the whole Western world coming down upon the populations of the world. In America, you were ordered to stay in your house. Churches were ordered to stay closed, which is totally unconstitutional. Totally unconstitutional. But churches were ordered to stay closed. And all kinds of totalitarian measures were taken. In Kentucky, I remember this one church wanted to have a service in their parking lot. And the people would stay in the cars in the parking lot. And the Governor Bashir, I think it was, ordered them, he had the police, or some of the local people had the police go around writing down their license numbers to keep track of who was defying them. I mean, I couldn't believe this happened in America. Governor after governor. In New Jersey, they sent drones over people's houses to make sure they were staying in the house and not mixing with anyone or keeping their social distance. It's amazing what happened in America and in England and in Australia, New Zealand, all of Europe, Western world, which prides itself on freedom. And look what happened in a short time because of a so-called pandemic. It's amazing. At any rate, one of the biggest movers of this, as I've mentioned several times, is Klaus Schwab, this German who looks like a James Bond villain, and he's pushing this thing. Now, his model, and he's had great success. He's had many disciples leave that place, including the Prime Minister of Canada, leave that place highly influenced by him and other people. And it's amazing. Now, Klaus Schwab's, he thinks the model for this New World Order is China, communist China. Totalitarian control, total control over the population. And I want to get into that a little bit more, as I said, next week. But he believes that's the future. Now, he's calling this final phase. Now, I believe if they bring this in, it is the final phase of human history. I believe Christ comes and ends this thing. But he's calling this the fourth industrial revolution. I find that interesting considering Hitler had the Third Reich. Anyway, another person in this pushing this thing is Bill Gates. Bill Gates is, now some of these people have good intentions. It's just that the good intentions get all wrapped up in other ideas, and Gates wants to control the population, well, of course, with vaccines, but he also wants to control the population with digital health cards and health information, and which sounds good. If there's a pandemic, you can track people all over the planet, which sounds good, but it gives them, the government, the ability to track people all over the planet. Declare a pandemic, which they're working on right now through the World Health Organization, which I'll talk about later, and declare a pandemic, and then have total control over the population, and especially controlling the movement of the population. Also, there's other people. George Soros, this famous billionaire, has been pushing this and funding a lot of this. King Charles of England, who's involved in this because he believes that we have to save the planet, that environmentally the planet is dying and we have to save the planet. And that's the idea of many of these people. The head of the World Health Organization, the head of the UN. Many of these people are totally on board with Klaus Schwab and bringing about this world government, which they think will save the population. Now, they believe, rightly or wrongly, and I believe wrongly, that the world has too many people. They have to reduce the population, which scares, whatever out of me. They want to reduce the population. Now, they want to bring down the population from between 6 and 7 billion, where it is now, to 500 million, which is astounding to me. Astounding. And that they believe that would save the planet. Well, we only have, first they said, years ago they said we had 10 years, and then they had 10 years, and then we had another 10 years, and then we had another 10 years. But anyway, that's what's going on with these people. And in the crazy idea of saving the planet, they are buying up farmland in America and other countries and taking it out of commission, taking it out of production. Also, supply chains are being heavily affected by these people in an effort to curb the population and various things. But like I said, if you gave them control over your country environmentally, they have control over your energy input and output. I mean, it's a scary thought. These people, the elites of this, behind this movement, would have total control over your heat and water and whatever. Now, this is all about, I believe, seizing control. It's all about getting control. But there's many people. I could mention many politicians in this country who have, just in the recent past, and right now in Washington, who are totally on board with this thing. Totally on board with this thing. And that's why I think, like I said, that this guy running around saying America first has a target on his back, because they want a weak and compliant and toothless lion to plug into this. Now, I want you to turn to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11 and 12. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 11 and 12. And here we have what is basically the person behind all of this. I know we can talk about Klaus Schwab and all these billionaires and George Soros and all these billionaires, but who is really pushing this total control of the planet? Let's look at Ephesians chapter 6. And if I can get to it. Here we are. Ephesians chapter 6, verses 11 and 12. Paul says this: "Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age." Excuse me. "Against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." So it is ultimately the devil that is pushing this thing to control everything. America was based on freedom, and it's the devil who's trying to get control of everything. Excuse me. Now, we've looked at this beast, and it has, as I said, the feet of a bear, as I said many times, the body of a lion, or the body of a leopard, and the mouth of a lion. Now, I want to look at some more aspects of this to bring it into focus, a little bit more focus. I want to look, first of all, at the 7 heads and the 10 horns. I want to try to explain the 7 heads and 10 horns on this beast. I want you to turn to Revelation 17. Revelation 17. And we'll begin with verse 1. Now, we went to this. I talked about this chapter before we went to this when we had the first session. But I want to look at it again in a slightly different way. Revelation 17. And let's begin with verse 1. Reading verse 1. Verse 1. And it says this. Now, John, remember, has visions, as I just said, and they're similar to Daniel's. Now, John says this, chapter 17, verse 1 of Revelation. "Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, 'Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication.' So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with golden and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand the golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled at great amazement. So he sees this woman, as we talked about before. This is a fallen woman. This is the indicative, or symbolic, I should say, of the fallen church at the end. Remember I said there'll be a world church, a world government, and a world economy. Now this world church, these churches come together, apostatize, form this corrupt church at the end. All the churches come together. And you're talking about Buddhists and Hindus, and all these things come together. Islam into this it becomes corrupt. False doctrines all over the place. That's what he's seeing. Now, as I said, a virgin is symbolic of Christ's bride. But this is symbolic of the fallen church at the end. Now, I want to further look at this. I want you to go to 1 Timothy chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. 1 Timothy chapter 4, beginning with verse 1. And Paul says this. Now, Paul's talking about the last days to Timothy in this letter. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now, the Spirit expressly says that in latter times, in the last days, some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron. Now, so Paul is saying in the last days, there will be apostasy. People will embrace the doctrines of he says demons or devils. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, Paul says there will be a falling away. There'll be a falling away of the church. They will, exactly what he told Timothy, they'll be embracing false doctrine. Now, I believe that has already begun with some of the main churches, the hierarchies of the churches in America. Some of these churches are splitting, are dividing over gay marriage and gay pastors and all this stuff, and abortion. So we're seeing these schisms coming because the churches are really, some of them are going off the rails already in just this country alone. Now, as I said, they will abandon sound doctrine. Now, let me say this. The Bible is full of all kinds of symbolism, all kinds of fascinating layers of meaning. Now, with this woman was symbolized, or was shadowed, the shadow for this woman was Jezebel and of course, Ahab. Ahab was symbolic. Remember, Elijah went to them, and he said, no rain or dew for 3.5 years. The woman Jezebel was heavily involved in Baal worship. She was a high priestess. And that's who this woman is, she was kind of a shadow of this woman. And the beast is kind of a shadow of Ahab. He was the secular side, and he was corrupt. And Elijah went up against him and brought fire down from heaven. So there's a lot of symbolism for that in the Bible, for this last day church. Now, movement, world church. Now, I want to look at the horns and the crowns. 10 crowns or 10 horns. Let's look at them. Now, Revelation 17, the angel explains much of this, fairly well. I mean, it's amazing how much we can understand or get from this at right now at this point in time. Let's read Revelation 17, and let's begin with verse 12. Revelation 17, verse 12. Verse 12. Verse 12, if I can get there again. Revelation 17, verse 12. Now, there you go. 17, verse 12. There we are. The 10 horns. Now, the angel's talking to John. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. Short time. They are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called chosen and faithful. So there's 10 kings that will rule. Now, I believe these 10 kings are symbolic or represent 10 divisions of this New World Order. The New World Order, I believe, and many other people believe, is going to be in 10 divisions or 10 unions around the world. I don't believe this is, necessarily the Roman Empire rising. I believe it's worldwide. We have to think out of the box. Worldwide. And these 10 divisions or 10 unions are already beginning to take shape in the world. For example, we have, as of right now, we have the African Union. We have the European Union. Now, the European Union, I believe, is a precursor to this 10-horn thing. The world will go into these 10 divisions at the last, I believe, 3.5 years or 1,260 days, whatever you want to say, times and dividing of time. But the European Union is a precursor to that. Now, the European Union is interesting because all the decisions for 14 nations that are in the European Union are decided by these bureaucrats in Brussels, Belgium. The bureaucrats are not elected by the people. They're just appointed. And they ride roughshod over all of the European nations, these 14 nations. I remember when in the 1950s, it was the common market. Then the common market developed into 10 nations. Everybody's so excited, the prophecy is being fulfilled, and then it went to 14 nations eventually. But at any rate, the people in Brussels ride roughshod over all of the nations, the 14 nations. Now, I lived in England in 1991, 1992. I lived overseas a lot, but I lived in Europe, in England, 91, 92. Now, when I was there, the people of Britain were trying to force the people of Britain into the European Union. And the people of Britain didn't want to go into the Union because they thought, rightfully so, that they would lose control of their borders, they'd lose control of their sovereignty, they'd lose control of their currency, their culture. Many things would be heavily affected by the rest of Europe and by these people in Brussels. And so they fought it. I left in 92, I think around 94, 95, somewhere in there, they shoved the parliament and the politicians shoved Britain into this European Union, even though they didn't want to go. They shoved them into it, as politicians often do. They don't care about the will of the people. They're just going to do what they're going to do. And so Britain was shoved into this thing. Now, that's exactly what happened. They did lose some control of their currency, their culture, their borders especially. They've been flooded, a tidal wave of immigrants from Africa and from the Middle East. And the cultures are, of course, totally different. But at any rate, about 2014, the Brits, it was put up for a vote. Finally, the Brits, they complained so much, they finally put it up for a vote. And in that vote, the British people overwhelmingly voted to leave the European Union. They called it Brexit. And a man by the name of Nigel Farage was pioneering this thing, pushing this thing, standing for freedom. And they voted to leave. Now, here we are, 2024, and they're still not completely out of the European Union. The politicians have dragged their feet, as they do in America much of the time. And so they're still stuck there in many ways. So that's what I believe is happening. I believe it will be 10 divisions and 10 unions. Now, I want to talk about the 7 heads. Let's look at the 7 heads. We saw the 10 horns or crowns. Now, 7 heads. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17, verses 9 through 11. 9 through 11. Now, here the angel talks to John again about the 7 heads. Here is the mind which was wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not, and is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, is going to perdition. Now, let me say this. Let me start with this. Notice he says the 7 heads are the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now this is in reference to Rome. The 7 heads or 7 mountains are really, another translation is 7 hills. The 7 hills of Rome. Many of you know this. You've heard this in the past. We used to say this a lot, 7 hills of Rome. I believe the Vatican, as it is now, will be heavily involved in this push for a new world government, a world order, environmental radicalism. The Pope they have now, Pope Francis, is pushing. He sends representatives to these meetings with Klaus Schwab and all these people, these fat cats and elites get together once or twice in Davos, Switzerland, a year. And they get together. And the Vatican always sends representatives. And Francis is pushing this thing. He really wants to bring this thing in. and what's interesting to me is the Vatican has issued several statements wanting to make Jerusalem an international city, take it out of the hands of the Jews and make it an international city. And they would have control of the Temple Mount and the holy sites. That's what they want, is control. And many of these forces that are these forces are I should say forces working for this new world order are pushing to get to Jerusalem because that's where the third temple will be. That's when the Antichrist, I believe, will set down. At any rate, this is one of the proclamations that the Vatican issued in 2011, but it's still apropos. It's an article by Giulio Miadi. He's reporting on the Vatican in Italy, anyway, the title is "The Vatican Wants to Lay Its Hands on Jerusalem." The Vatican is now reiterating demands for control of religious sites in Jerusalem. Peace negotiations in the Middle East must tackle the issue of the status of the holy sites of Jerusalem. Cardinal Jean-Louis Tauran, head of the Vatican's Council for Interreligious Dialogue, declared several days ago in Rome, there will not be peace if the question of the holy sites is not adequately resolved, Tauran said. The part of Jerusalem within the walls where the holy sites of 3 religions is humanity's heritage. The sacred and unique character of the area must be safeguarded, and it can only be done with a special internationally guaranteed statute. The Israeli government and the Vatican are now deadlocked in discussion over the status of the religious sites. Vatican officials are now reiterating their demand for control over the religious sites in the ancient and holy city founded by King David, as the capital of ancient Israel and now the capital of the reestablished Jewish state. The Vatican wants Israel to relinquish sovereignty at the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. The Holy See uses the expression Holy Basin, which refers to the area of the Temple Mount, the Mount of Olives, Mount Zion, and a variety of Christian holy sites, which former President Bill Clinton and President Obama began recommending to be re-administered under a special regime. Now, I believe that regime is going to eventually turn into a third temple. And as it says in Revelation 11, it will be trodden down by the Gentiles for 3.5 years. I believe that's where they're headed. They want to get their hands on Jerusalem. They want to get their hands on and build a third temple. And in that third temple, I think that's where the Antichrist will eventually set down. But at any rate, that's what's going on, I believe. Now, as I said, Francis has caused a huge schism over his requesting that they begin blessing gay marriages, or I should say gay unions, and also some of the stuff he's been pushing with the world government, and also his pushing of his kind of softening on abortion and this kind of thing. So there's a huge schism in the Catholic Church. But the hierarchy seems to be on board with this world government. Now, the 7 heads, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come, and when he comes, he will not last but a short time. I believe this is, and many people are kind of coming to the same conclusion, this is the manifestation of this beast system down through the ages. For example, an empire would come up and persecute God's people and try to force them to worship, false gods and make slaves out of them. Now, 5 have fallen. Now, the first one, I believe, is Egypt, ancient Egypt. Remember, the children of Israel were slaves in ancient Egypt. and for 400 years. And finally Moses is brought by God, and Moses delivers them out of the Egyptian slavery. So I believe Egypt was the first one, the first empire, the manifestation of that beast system. The second is Assyria. The Assyrians came, and remember, if you read the Bible in the Old Testament, Israel, because of its defying of God, was divided into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom was Israel. The southern kingdom was Judah. Now the Assyrians come in and take the 10 tribes in the north in Israel and take them back to Assyria. And of course, they're known as the 10 lost tribes. The second one, that's the second one, persecuting God's people, trying to obliterate God's people. The third one is Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar comes up and destroys the temple and destroys the holy city and takes them captive back to Babylon. Now this includes Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the third one that persecuted God's people and trying to force them to worship false gods. Now, the fourth one is Persia. Persia is an ancient kingdom. Now the Persians, you remember the story of Esther, where Haman was going to kill all the Jews. And Mordecai, Esther's cousin, said, you must go to the king. You must step up and save your people. For a time such as this, you have been called. And I believe that's all of us today. A time such as this, you have been called. But at any rate, Esther finally gets the nerve and says, okay, if I perish, I perish, but I'm going to do this. And she did and saved her people. So that's the fourth one. Now the fifth one is Greece, ancient Greece. Alexander the Great came across and made war and conquered all the Middle East, including Israel. Now, many scholars believe, or some scholars believe, whatever, that the dangers of Greece was really their philosophy. That some of the philosophies of the ancient Greeks crept into Judaism, such as the philosophy of natural immortality, like in Hinduism, where you die and you go somewhere. You're off going somewhere and all this stuff. And anyway, that became a teaching throughout the Middle East, this natural immortality. But anyway, the Greeks, their biggest threat was philosophically, in many ways. Also, and so anyway, 5 have fallen. We have Egypt, we have Assyria, we have Babylon, we have Persia, we have Greece. Now, one is. Now, John has this vision in the Roman Empire, present tense. This is past tense, this is present tense. He has it in the Roman Empire, present tense. And you remember how the emperors, Nero and Domitian and Trajan, persecuted and tried to completely wipe out the Christianity as well as the Jews. And it went on and on and on and on. Anyway, so there, one is yet to come, and when he comes, he will last but a short time. The seventh one, and I believe the seventh one, and many other people do believe, is Adolf Hitler. Hitler comes, he's going to last 1,000 years, 1,000-year Reich, a millennium. But he only lasts about, 12, 13 years, the Third Reich. But in those 12 and 13 years, he kills over 6 million Jews. Probably that's a low estimate. And he kills a lot of Christians along with it, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So I believe Hitler comes along, in the future from John, and short time he's out. Now there's an eighth one coming. An eighth one comes. Now this eighth one, I believe, is the New World Order. I believe it's in phases. A first phase. Now you have a crisis. Let's say Daniel 8 is the beginning point. That war in the Middle East when he got in the ram. A crisis. Then they try to put this whole thing, never waste a good crisis. And when you have a crisis, like with COVID, you can get away with all kinds of stuff because people are scared to death. So United States goes through this war, hot, fast war, and it begins all of a sudden to fall apart following that he-goat and a ram clash. Now it begins to fall apart. Now when it goes down, it takes the rest of the world with it financially, and overextended. And all of a sudden, these people come out of the woodwork like Klaus Schwab, and they want, let's bring it together. Let's save ourselves. Let's bring it to a new world order. Let's put the world together, and we'll have peace for 1,000 years. And they start to put it together, let's say 2-3 years. Then there's a second crisis, perhaps a false Armageddon, a deadly wound. And this thing falls apart. This beast system falls apart. They're at each other again in the Middle East, whatever, it falls apart. Then the little horn, the false prophet shows up. The little horn. False prophet shows up and says, let's put this beast together again. The last half of Revelation 13 we'll look at next week. Let's put this beast together again. Let's renew it. Let's restore it. Let's revamp it. Let's make it new and improved. And they tighten the screws into a one world order where you cannot buy or sell unless you have a mark. That's second half. Now, many scholars believe there's a 7-year tribulation. I believe it's a little bit shorter than that. For certain reasons, I think God will cut the day short. But I think there's a crisis, and he tried to put it together, a second crisis, and that's that's Revelation 13. And then Christ comes and ends it. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm seeing. Now, I want to continue on, and I want to go back to Revelation 13, and I want to finish that first half. Revelation 13, let's finish the first half. And we're going to read verses 3 through 5 to finish up, 3 through 5. And John says this, Revelation 13, verse 3. And I saw one of the heads as if mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon and gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" Well, it's a world government, a world, everything is. Who can fight this system? That's come together, all the nations. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Now, this is a timed period, I believe, at the very end. And we're going to look into this 42 months. It's 42 months, 3.5 years, times and dividing of time. However you want to, the Bible says it over and over and over. Now, why God picks 3.5 years is beyond me. I don't understand it. But that's what he's given this beast system for 3.5 years, coming in the full focus, 3.5 years at the end, and then Christ comes. Now, I want to say that what I wanted to say with this beast system was that the 3.5, as I said, keeps turning up and turning up. Now, remember, Jesus had 3.5 years to show his ministry. Is it possible that the devil has 3.5 years to show his at the end, to show what his kingdom will be like? Is that possible? Now remember, as we touched upon, Elijah said there'd be no rain or no dew when he marched into that palace of Ahab and Jezebel. He said no rain and no dew. And it came out to 3.5 years for some reason. 3.5. Now we're going to be looking at that time period as we go along. So at any rate, I believe that's what's going on. It has and I believe that deadly wound is some kind of hot, fast war, and this whole thing goes down. And then they bring it back. The Antichrist, the false prophet shows up, and they bring it all back. Let's make an image to that first beast. The image to the first beast is let's make another new world order, but this is a one world order, new and improved. Now, I want you to look at one last thing here. Revelation 13. Let's look at verses 6 through 10. Verses 6 through 10. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. Now, this is all the voices of the New World Order plus the false prophet. And it was granted to him, verse 7, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation, worldwide. One world order. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads in the captivity shall go in the captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Okay, we're going to stop there. One thing I wanted to bring out, there's blasphemies all over the place. The planet has gone totally off the rails. The false prophet shows up to lead the way to the Antichrist like John the Baptist. I want to mention this, verse 8. All who dwell on the earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the book of life. Now, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking there's some kind of, and other people do too, there's some kind of special ministry going on up there while all this is going on down here. In that last 42 months, 3.5 years. There's some kind of special ministry. Now, I believe I'm calling it the blotting out. When you come to Jesus, your sins are forgiven. But there's some final ministry left up there, so it seems. And I can show you this through Daniel and Revelation. Revelation 4, 5, and 6. It's not just that Jesus is in the temple, and God and the Father's in the temple, and that's the scroll and all this. There's some kind of ministry, a final phase of ministry there. I believe when it seems to me, logically, that before the earth was created, before the foundations of the world, there was a book of life. And God knew everybody that was going to live on this planet. And he knows everything. Now, everybody's name is written in that book of life. Now, that we have the fall. Adam and Eve fell. And sin came into the world. All this misery came into the world. Now, I believe at the end, they have some special ministry up there. And like I said, we're going to kind of look at it in detail. Some special ministry up there. And either your sins are blotted out in the end, or your name is blotted out from the book of life. One or the other. If you've accepted Christ, your sins are blotted out. If you haven't accepted Christ, if you're still fighting God, and of course this whole thing is over, all decisions have been made, your names are blotted out from the book of life. Or so it seems. Now, let me show you a little bit more of this. Go to Revelation chapter 3, verse 5. Revelation chapter 3, verse 5. Now here are, of course, the 7 churches, and you can make a good argument that it could represent 7 ages of the church down through history, or 7 churches, symbolically 7 churches in the end, and their own characteristics. But let's look at verse 5. Jesus says this, chapter 3 of Revelation, "He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels." So I think there's this special ministry. Now this was typified, let me just say this. This was typified by the high priest. Remember in the sacrificial system, the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies once a year. Once a year. Now he would go into the Holy of Holies, the high priest, and he would take in a sacrifice for his family and him, and also for everyone in Israel. Now, if you had not, confessed your sins during the trumpets that were blowing, you had not confessed your sins, you're cut off. I believe this is similar to that. That was a type or a shadow of what Christ does at the end. And I can show you that, and we will look at that at some point. Now, I want to finish up with an article I think is an article I find fascinating. And it starts out a bit heavy, but then it ends with some hope. It's by Jerry Nukem, and I took it off the WorldNet Daily website, a good site, November 7th, 2023. Jerry Nukem says this: "Are we witnessing the suicide of the nation? America is falling apart, so it seems. About a decade ago, Dr. Richard Land, then president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, today the executive editor of the Christian Post, wrote a book called The Divided States of America. If we were divided then, how much more so today? It is inconceivable that the day would come that Jews in America," and we're talking about anti-Semitism, we're seeing it all over the place, in America, that Jews in America would need to feel fearful. For all of its flaws, America has been a secure place of refuge for the downtrodden, including the Jews who have been historically oppressed in nation after nation. This is an anti-Semitic wave. On college campuses we're still seeing, and in the streets. It's just this anti-Semitic wave is just one of the many examples of the decline of our nation. Several months ago, the Wall Street Journal opined that if Western civilization, of which the United States is a prime example, were to die, it would be through suicide. In that op-ed, Jared Baker notes, "If we are losing it, it's because we are losing our soul. There is a battle right now for the soul of America, an intense battle, I can't express it enough. We are losing our soul, our sense of purpose as a society, our identity as a civilization. We in the West are in the grip of an ideology that disowns our genius, denounces our success, disdains merit, elevates victimhood, embraces societal self-loathing. And that is true to so many people. Oh, hate America, you know. And enforces it all in a web of illusionary and authoritarian rule, large and small. And that's where they're headed. They get total control. However, Peter Lilback, founding president of Providence Forum, wrote, "There's always a chance for revival, reformation, new beginnings, but it's a dangerous time. We are deciding, will there be a future for America? Will we choose, as George Washington once said, the first president, to follow the divine author of our blessed religion? We are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. If each of us in our own place choose to do what is right, we begin to change history." Lilback concluded, "America's not finished unless we die by suicide." That's what Abraham Lincoln once said. A free nation will live forever, or it will die by suicide. A house divided cannot stand. So how do we get back on the right track? By returning to the basic principles. The essence of the American experiment is self-rule under God. Self-rule and self-discipline under God. It requires self-discipline, as Paul Harvey used to say on the radio. Our national birth certificate is a Declaration of Independence. It says that our rights come from the Creator, and not from government. And government derives its authority from the consent of the governed. How we've completely turned that around. It's amazing. Consider the advice of George Washington. He sent a letter to the governors of the 13 states. In it, Washington said that he prayed we will all learn to imitate Jesus Christ. He is essentially praying that God would give us the grace to follow the example of Jesus, that we would display love, humbleness, grace, and a peaceful disposition. If we don't follow Christ as the father of our country, we can never hope to be a happy nation. In fact, we will be anything but a happy nation, kind of like we're seeing right now. This reminds me, and I want to end with this, 2 Chronicles 7:14. Many people are repeating this. It's turning up in many places, many worship services. If my people who are called by my name, God says, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. And it's wonderful. I mean, God could give us still, extend our prosperity a little while longer, extend, the blessings a little while longer if we turn back to Him. Now, I want to say, in closing, I hope that you come back next time. Our study, we're going to look at this last half of Revelation 13, where you can't buy or sell, and the different manifestations of that, of the mark of the beast. And anyway, I want to also say in the end, if you have not come to Jesus Christ, if you have not made peace with God, if you have not accepted salvation through His shed blood, now is the time. Now is the time. I urge you to come to Christ. And hope to see you next time. God bless all of you.